What's up, everybody? Andrew Mahone here with Darium's Competitive Pokemon, back in standard format. Really excited to be testing standard format again. I've got an updated Gardevoir GX deck for you all. I've taken some tips and strategies from successful lists that I've seen around, from the World Championships. I've been testing standard, pretty much every waking hour since I got home from Fort Wayne Regionals about a day ago. So I also was putting some time into this list before Fort Wayne Regionals, but excited to finally let you all see what I'm working on here. I think Gardevoir GX is the deck to beat in standard. I think in standard format you're going to see the return of a lot of these big ability one-hit KO decks, especially with Hex Maniac rotating out of format. It kind of opens the floodgates for ability decks to be able to really take off. I mean, especially since the format is slowing down. No more Trainer's Mail, no more Shaman EX, no more Acrobike. The format really, no more Verse Seeker. The format really slows down, and resource management becomes absolutely crucial. I've got a lot to talk about as far as standard format goes. It's a really, really fun format to play, and I'm just very excited about it going forward here. Got a brand new Gardevoir list. I think this list is pretty dang near optimal. I mean, it's running fantastic right now, and you'll see that a lot of my ideas and views have changed in the last month or so since I've been testing this deck out. So let's take a look and see what makes this deck work. First of all, we're going to start off with 3 copies of Gardevoir GX, 1 Gallade, 3 copies of Kirlia, 4 copies of Ralts. We also play a 2/2 Octillery line, 3 copies of Tapu Lele GX, 1 Vulpix, and 1 Diancie. So this is it for the cast. You guys can see I'm on the Octillery train now. I was not during Worlds format, but now the Versus Seeker is gone. Octillery is absolutely insane. I love Octillery in a lot of these standard decks. They just really help you draw in the middle of the game without Versus Seeker, a crutch that we used to really, really rely on to fetch our supporters in the middle of the game. Octillery can help you get out of those dead draws. And now pretty much the only thing to stop Octillery from functioning is Gardevoir. So Gardevoir has a pretty good Gardevoir matchup anyway, with that GX attack being able to shuffle all your items back in. So I think going full on ability draw for this deck is the way to go. Obviously Gardevoir GX is our main attacker. Has that Secret Spring ability allowing you to accelerate fairy energy from the hand once per turn for each Gardevoir GX that you have in play. You can also see that I'm only running 3 copies of Gardevoir GX now and 1 copy of Gallade. I have hopped on the Gallade bandwagon as well. I was originally very skeptical and not into it, but now that we've got this list firing on all 6 cylinders, the list sets up extremely consistently, and there is less things to threaten your Gardevoir GX. The format is slower, so you have the time to set up multiple Gardevoir GX and a Gallade now. Gallade is useful for this premonition ability, allowing you to look at the top 5 cards of your deck and put them in any order. Combos very well with Octillery's Abyssal Hand draw, right? Or as me and my friends like to call it, Abysmal Hand, right? Abyssal Hand lets you fill your hand to 5 cards once per turn. If you have 2 Octillery out, you could do it twice. Fill your hand to 5, play some cards down, fill your hand to 5 again. Very useful with Gallade's Premonition. But Gallade also just gives this deck a very valuable non-EX attacker. So if you do find yourself going up against the Alolan Ninetales, the non-GX one, Gallade can knock that out. If you find yourself going up against the likes of Drampa, Gallade can very swiftly knock out Drampa, Darkrai. Gallade also great against some of these lightning type Pokemon as well, just being able to knock them out in 1 hit. So really good, if you happen to be playing against a Vikavolt Tapu Bulu deck, Gallade could swiftly knock out a Vikavolt on the bench, and just with that Premonition ability allows you to search out your cards like Guzma and things like that, maybe your DCEs, and draw into them just as you would like to with Abyssal Hand to really allow you to pull off some complex plays. So I am hip to this whole engine now. It's working smoothly, and I really love the way it functions in this list. We still have our thick, 4 Ralts, 3 Kirlia. I love 3 Kirlia in here. Just being able to evolve up through Kirlia makes things very stable, and since the format is slower, you can really, you have the luxury of being able to go up through Kirlia just fine. You could use Vulpix and Beakid for your Kirlias. You could Beakid for a Gardevoir and an Octillery. A lot of times on the first turn of the game, I'll find myself, we search out Vulpix and retreat into it, and then you might use Bridget grab yourself a Remoraid, a Ralts, and maybe another Ralts, and then you could beacon, right? And then you might get your Octillery and a Curlia. So very consistent in that regard, you know, being able to bridge it for your Remoraid and then just beacon right away to grab your Octillery line too. So very consistent list. We are playing a 1-1 split of the Vulpix and Diancie. Diancie is useful just if you do happen to encounter an opponent playing, you know, a Po-Town deck where they're trying to stack damage onto your evolutions by, you know, by when you evolve from hand, the Po-Town's 3 damage counters kicks in. Diancie gets by that, and that is a big threat to this deck. I think that those kinds of lists are still going to be popular, you know, Gardevoir, Po-Town, Drampa, stuff like that. So Diancie, very good at getting around that. Also just a nice consistency card. And Diamond Storm is still a pretty useful, nifty little attack too, being able to heal all of your fairy Pokemon 30 damage. If you do happen to play against a deck that runs Tapu Koko promo, you know, with that flying flip, trying to weaken your Gardevoirs before they get out, you know, you can counter that with Diamond Storm while you continue to set up. So that's it for the Pokemon cast. You can see I am running 2 copies of Octillery because he's that important, but let's get on to the supporters. Going to talk a little bit about what the supporter engine looks like now that we are no longer running Versus Seeker. I have changed the supporter counts quite a bit since the last video I released, so let's take a look. Play 4 copies of Professor Sycamore, 4 copies of N, since these are the 2 best draw supporters in standard format. We're playing 3 copies of Guzma, just awesome Lysander ability. I guess we could call it a Guzma effect now, being able to search out Pokemon on your opponent's bench, bring it to the active, also acting as a switch card for yourself, so you could get those Octillery and Diancie, things like that, out of the active position. You know, can also heal status conditions if you happen to get yourself, you know, paralyzed or something like that. Just all around fantastic card. Love 3 copies of Guzma. We also play 2 copies of Bridget. This is new. I had been on just 1 copy of Bridget for a while, but now that, you know, now that standard format is just much slower than it used to be, now that there are no Versus Seekers, things like that, Bridget is just an essential card. I mean, getting it on the first turn of the game just really sets you, you know, above and beyond the opponent if they don't bridge it on the first turn of the game, especially if you're both playing setup decks. So Bridget is just that important. I'm gonna vouch for 2 copies of Bridget now in almost all setup decks. Just it boosts the consistency of being able to get your turn 1 Bridget just a whole lot. I mean, with 3 copies of Tapu Lele, 4 Ultra Ball, and 2 copies of Bridget, that's what, 3, 7, 8, 9. That's like 9 outs to a turn 1 Bridget in your deck, which is totally insane. I mean, you get it all the time. And then obviously, you know, with 2 copies, it's only like 1 in 100 odds or something that you prize both your copies of Bridget. So that doesn't happen a lot either. So 2 copies of Bridget, totally fantastic. Love it in this format. I'm also playing 2 copies of Skyla. So that's it for the supporters. You can notice that I did end up cutting those Lily that I was running earlier. The Lily ended up being a little, you know, a little underwhelming. It just wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. The Octillery engine, on the other hand, totally fantastic. So you can see I took those 2 spots from where I used to run 2 Lily, dropped those in to 2, you know, another 1-1 line of Octillery. So we're running the 2-2 Octillery line, and that has been fantastic. Just being able to get those out with Bridget. You know, you Bridget turn 1 almost every single game, get those Remoraids out, and then can instantly get out turn 2 Octillery all the time, which just makes this deck run totally incredibly. Being able to draw throughout the game, and then you're pretty much end proof as well. So that's just totally great. We do keep the Skylas in here. Since this deck does run on Octillery, you can use Skyla to get your useful 1-of item cards, like Field Blower if you're playing against a Gardevoir deck, or, you know, your Choice Band, or your Professor's Letter, Skyla, or your Rare Candy, right? Skyla can search these cards out, and then you could continue to draw with Octillery. So I really like Skyla in here for that. Skyla boosts actually the consistency of getting a turn 2 Gardevoir a whole lot. I found that, you know, I'm actually getting turn 2 Gardevoirs way more often with this list than I ever got with the standard list, because you don't open these weird hands with Versus Seeker anymore like you used to. Every card that you open is a live card. and I just find that just so great. I mean, it's really refreshing to play a deck without Versus Seeker again. I found myself playing these games, and you're thinking about, oh, can I afford to Ultra Ball this N away? Can I afford to Ultra Ball this Guzma away? It really makes you stop and think about your resources, and Skyla just helps you kind of hand select those resources out of your deck so you could use them optimally. You're not going to be just using Professor Sycamore every turn of the game, anymore like you used to. You used to be able to just blow through your deck. Sycamore versus Seeker. Sycamore, Sycamore, Sycamore. Those days are gone. And anybody that's been playing the game for, 4 or 5 years or so, will remember back, years ago when the format was slower like this. I think it's a lot more fun to play and a lot more rewarding with some of the decisions that you have to make in game. Moving on to our items, we have 4 copies of Ultra Ball, 3 copies of Rare Candy, 2 Field Blower, 1 Super Rod, 1 Professor's Letter, and 1 Choice Band. So you can tell we're running a whole lot less items now that Verse Seeker is gone, right? I mean, so that makes Trash Avalanche less effective against these decks, since it's harder for Trash Avalanche Gardevoir to get items in your discard pile now that there's not going to be Versus Seekers in your discard pile either. We're on the 4 copies of Ultra Ball, obviously great consistency card. There's enough been said about that card already. 3 copies of Rare Candy is totally plenty. You're going to find yourself getting Rare Candy when you need it, especially with Skyla. But most of the time you're going to evolve up manually through Curlia, just because you can afford to take your time to really set up and then pull off the perfect Guzma play to make the first crucial hit on your opponent. Since many of these setup decks are going to be using setup Pokemon like Vulpix or Diancie, there's going to be somebody in the active usually that is kind of setting up, so you could sit back and set up as well, and then you want to go ahead and go for the Guzma play once you get your board position established. We do play 2 copies of Field Blower just because Gardevoir is still really strong with all these abilities coming into play, with Metagross, Gardevoir, Vikavolt, Volcanion, all are going to be very popular decks, very strong decks in standard format. Gardevoir is surely going to pop up in some way, shape, or form. I can promise you that. So you're going to need to continue to play Field Blower. I'm playing 2 to 3 Field Blower in almost all of my ability decks. Gardevoir, you could search this out with Skyla. Also tends to be a little bit better versus Gardevoir naturally because of that GX attack. So only playing 2 copies of Field Blower here, also because you could Twilight them back in. So it's not really necessary to play 3. I do like 1 copy of Professor's Letter. It really just helps you get those powerful plays going. With Skyla, just if you need to guarantee yourself 2 energy, you could go get it with a Skyla. I like that. Now that Teammates is rotated, Teammates was really good for that at Worlds. I'd seen some players playing Teammates in their Gardevoir lists. Skyla is kind of what we got now as far as our selective supporter goes. So I do like Skyla for Professor's Letter. Likewise, Skyla for Choice Band. Very effective if you just need to add that 30 damage on. Sometimes you don't have quite as much Gardevoir GX setup as you might like, especially if they're getting mowed down by something very quickly. Being able to have at least 1 Choice Band in the deck just as a kind of additional attachment that doesn't require you having a Gardevoir setup to get an extra fairy into play. The Choice Band can be very useful for hitting some crucial numbers. And 1 copy of Super Rod. I love Super Rod just because it allows you to throw, since we're only playing 3 copies of Gardevoir GX, you could throw one of your Gardevoir GX back into the deck if you happen to discard it. Also useful for getting fairy energies back into the deck, getting Octilleries back into the deck. I love Super Rod in here now, especially since the format is slower than it was. I mean, before, you really wanted to just get a very fast Gardevoir GX. You kind of had to. The format was faster. There wasn't as many setup decks. Now that the format is kind of moved down to a slower pace, there's less just Sycamore, Sycamore, Sycamore. You really have time to kind of, preserve your Super Rod and use it optimally. I'll find my Super Rod in an opening hand with a Sycamore and an N, and I'll be like, oh, I want to save the Super Rod, so we'll just N. It's okay if I don't, get the most fast setup ever, because most decks are taking 2 to 3 turns to set up now, just before they really get rolling, and you have that luxury. So that's it for the items. Moving on to the energy count. You guys will see that I am still playing a good amount of energy in here. I love the 4 DCE. And then we are playing 9 copies of Fairy Energy. And that's just because this is just so consistent. You always hit your energy with 9 copies. The World Champion list did play 8, I believe. But 9, I'm just a big fan of 9. I mean, just always being able to use your ability on Gardevoir GX, to me, is the most effective way to play this deck and allows you to get the most energy into play, which makes Gardevoir the most effective that it can be. So that's it for my brand new, active testing Gardevoir GX deck. This is the list that I'm testing with when I'm preparing for my League Cups and for the upcoming regional championships. Give it a spin. Let me know what you all think of the list. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all for watching. Peace.